Welcome to Inside the Director's Circle, and this episode on productivity as a leader and how it's all about your energy. I'm Jason Langford Brown, your host, founder of the Director's Circle, and practicing business advisor and coaching psychologist. When we talk about productivity as leaders, we normally talk about it in two ways. First of all, around the notion of how well time managed we are and whether we prioritize well and spend time on the things that are important. And secondly, we talk about it in terms of energy, both energy we give and take away from ourselves and energy that others give and take away from us. And today's episode really is focused on that energy we give and take away from ourselves. So to help us with today's conversation and put some expertise into the subject, delighted to be joined by Claire Fudge. Claire is the founder of 4D, also a practicing clinical nutritionist and dietitian, also still an active triathlete, fresh back from the world champion Ironman in Hawaii earlier this year. So we're looking forward to Claire's insights, but also we'd like to bring some sort of leadership experience to this. And in that regard, delighted to be joined by Nicholl, Managing Director of Atlanta, global corporate finance business. Graham's also been MD of Barclays and held senior positions at KPMG. But before that, Graham was an entrepreneur in the fitness space, and like Claire, has been a very active guy, done the marathon to Sablas, and I've been, I was going to say fortunate or maybe unfortunate enough to have done a few tough guys with Graham over the years, which we may touch on as we go through this conversation. So it'd be great to get those insights. But just very quickly, before we get into the discussion, remember this is just a snapshot of what happens within our business leader community. So if you want to get more information or get more involved, just visit us at directors-circle.com. So Claire, thanks for joining us.
No worries. Thank you for the invite. Looking forward to the conversation.
Absolutely. So I suppose really for those that are kind of just questioning why we're even talking about this, why energy? Why energy in terms of productivity for leaders? And what are the main factors that we should be thinking about?
Good question. Well, the biggest thing that I hear people say to me is that I don't have enough energy. And I hear that in a number of different ways. So I don't have enough energy to maybe spend time with my family and friends after work. I don't have enough energy to go out and buy something healthy for lunch, to be able to cook, to be able to maybe we're not even talking training or exercise here, just move and keep your body moving. So the word energy is used in so many different ways. And I think we can use the word energy in many different ways. But the way that I look at it with my clients is through strategic management of their energy. And what do I mean by strategic management of energy? Well, that's really listening to your body's cues about your hunger, your appetite, about how well you've slept, about how much you're moving, and being able to use all of that data to be able to optimize your energy as much as possible, to optimize your life at work, but also, of course, at home and enjoying our time and our life outside of work as well.
Yeah, that's really interesting, Claire, listening to you on that initial response, because I know you and I have talked about this many, many times, and we often talk about it in terms of energy to do more at work and to be more productive. And I'm sure all of this will help with that. But it's really interesting. I think a lot of people maybe find the energy to get done what they need to get done, but they've got nothing less for the rest of their life, which I think is equally as important. Graham, you're a busy guy. What's your thoughts on that, Graham, in terms of having not just enough energy to do your job, but also having that something left in the tank for your personal life, for your leisure time, for your family?
Yeah, I think that is so important, because I've got two boys that keep us busy, kind of watching them play sport and things at evenings or weekends. But if you've in essence emptied the tank during the course of the day, then you don't necessarily make time to go and do those things with the family or go out socially. And you don't, even if you do make time, you're not necessarily present there because you're tired, you're distracted. So I think it's absolutely critical, both for yourself individually, but also when you think about as a leader, is encouraging your teams, the people that you work with, the people that you have the privilege of leading, to be able to think about that balance themselves. That people talk about work-life balance, but it's life balance in general, which I think is so important to get.
Yeah, Greg, would you mind just expand on that in terms of Yeah, I see many leaders, they'll want their people to be productive and et cetera, et cetera. I don't see many examples outside of just getting them to try and work a bit harder, of them actually encouraging them to make time and space for the things that are going to make them healthier and ultimately give them the energy for the rest of their life, as well as probably make them more productive in work as well. Could you maybe give some examples of where you've actually encouraged that? Any initiatives you may have done with your teams?
Yeah, probably more over the course of the past 2, 3 years since I'm dating this podcast recording now, but since the COVID period, because we certainly found that when people moved to working from home full time, actually often people were able to do more with their family, but they often found it more difficult to cut off between work and home. And because you were at home, you might just start a bit earlier. And because you're at home, the laptop lid doesn't necessarily get closed. And if you're sitting at the kitchen table working, then where's the division between your kind of work and your home? So that actually for me was a real eye opener from a leadership perspective of getting a bit of a view into people's lives, but also having to have different conversations with people about finding that balance, shutting things off. But a big part was about giving people permission, which sounds a bit daft. But I think as a leader, if you demonstrate that, yes, you work hard, but actually, if you have children and they're playing football one afternoon, you go and do that and tell your team you've done that, because it kind of reinforces the importance of, or the permission for them to be able to do it. So I think there's some of the things which are just that leadership shadow. Some other things that we've done historically is almost getting people to do things like block book things in their diary. So if you're going to go to the gym, if it's not booked in the diary, you probably won't go and do it, especially at lunchtime or at personal development time. Or actually something in previous role at Barclays that we introduced was a well-being day, typically that was put in place now once every 6 months or so, but it was basically no meetings internally. And that day was for you to do what you saw fit. And then people would post through the kind of internal equivalent of LinkedIn, but the internal communication channel. What were they doing? They were out walking their dog, they were going for a cycle, they were doing their personal development, they were clearing their mandatory learning. But all those things that actually helped them do something that was kind of important to them, cleared the diary a bit, or got some of those things off their to-do list that constantly gets pushed to the end of it. So I think part of it's, as I say, just that leading by example, and that helps people give permission to themselves, but in turn also some formal things about putting things more structured in the diary.
Yeah, and I think that permission piece is so powerful. I think you're right. And a lot of people, do worry about whether they've got permission. I think most people have really struggled historically to put things in their diary that were personal, that would be seen by their boss, for example. So I think actually encouraging them to do it very practically, I think that's some great lessons in there. Claire, from your perspective as a professional, were there things there that really resonated for you?
Yeah, I think I loved, Graham, what you're talking about in terms of like diarising things and having time put aside to do these like block booking sort of times to be able to look after your health. And people get to a certain point in business as professionals that you now have wealth, but people are now finding that they don't have the health to be able to enjoy it. So that's something that I talk about with my clients quite a lot. And I think the time element here is really interesting to explore, because where I often find people may say, well, I don't have time to get away from the computer and go and get lunch, or have an hour away from the screen, because they're worried about they're not going to finish work. But actually, if you're not fueling yourself properly, or you are slightly dehydrated, your productivity levels drop. So, and I'm sure we can all sat here, we all know of times where we've probably sat and literally looked at a screen and been, I'm going to flip that around, Graham, actually, but be present, but not productive. So you can be sat in a chair, but you're really not getting very much done. And, all of us sat here are people that are active. And actually, when you get away from your desk and you do something that's different, and actually activity is one of those things, you come back and you might find a task that you've looked at for an hour, you actually get done in 10 minutes. And that might be that you've got that processing time, that thinking time away from the screen. And we know that movement and exercise can really help us process thoughts, and for some people make decisions. But also giving yourself that permission, Jason, to come away from the screen, actually take time to go and have something to eat at lunchtime so that you are fueled to be able to sit back down and do that work. Or it might be that then you've got that energy in the evening to spend with your, you know, your family, or go to the gym indeed. So I think that the time elephant, maybe it is an elephant in the room. The time element of it is really interesting to explore, I think, with business leaders.
I think it is an elephant in the room, Claire, because I think still too many leaders are driving a behaviour of presenteeism. And you're just on that time boxing bit, it's great to hear Graham talk about that and you to reinforce it. I mean, when we talk about helping people be more productive and better time managed, we talk about time boxing a lot, and there's lots of reasons why it's powerful. In terms of, if it's not on your schedule, you're not going to do it, and that includes going to the gym or, you know, making time to eat and that kind of stuff. But one of the benefits that you're touching on there is, we say to people, when you start to log the time you spend on everything, you very quickly recognize how you, first of all, underestimate and overestimate how long things take. So you start to be better at estimating how long things are going to take. But you're right. I find this, because I've been doing it for a number of years, I sit there quickly and go, why is this taking me half a day? It normally takes me an hour. So I immediately recognize my energy's down. You know, I'm just sitting looking at a screen, achieving very little. So I think it's a really, really important point that we raise here. Claire, could you just go in a little bit more detail, maybe around, you talked very, very early in this conversation about sleep and fuel, how those things really impact us scientifically on our ability to be productive and have more energy.
Big question, long answer, but I will try I'll try and be succinct. But no, but super important. And actually, just going back to what you've just said, you know, actually, when you, and just touching on that point first, when you're time boxing things and then you find out how long something takes you to do, actually there are so many external factors to different days, things taking longer than others. Because actually, if you don't have enough sleep, so say you've tried to do something late in the evening, you've gone to bed late, you haven't had enough sleep, you may actually be eating up until midnight or beyond, because you're up in those hours, your sleep is going to be impacted. Even if you're a night owl, your sleep is still going to be impacted. And you know, what are the effects? What's the problem with that? And what problems do we see? Well, when you wake up in the morning, if you haven't had, it's not necessarily about the hours of sleep actually, and we know from more research, it's not, you know, you could have 8 hours of sleep, but you can have terrible sleep. So it's not necessarily about the number of hours of sleep, but it's the quality of that sleep. And there actually was a new sleep study out, I think it was in the last couple of weeks actually, that was looking at sleep and the quality, and that actually that somebody could manage on 5 or 6 hours, but it's how good that quality is and the things that impact it. And it is going back to actually the people that are going to bed earlier are the people that are having better quality sleep. So therefore you may be able to get away with less number of hours perhaps than other people. And when we don't have good quality sleep, or maybe not enough sleep, the problem is in the morning your stress hormone levels are going to be raised. And what impact does that have? Well, that has an impact, number one, on the energy that you feel. So how alert or awake do you feel? But also the impact on your appetite hormones, because we know that when we don't have enough sleep, the impact that has on one of our hormones, for example, ghrelin, which is produced in the stomach and makes us more hungry or wanting to eat, or the feelings of hunger. And this may then have an impact because the whole of that day you're feeling really tired. And I'm sure you can all think of examples now that I'm about to describe. So, you know, you're walking around, you're feeling really tired, and you think, oh, you know, you go and get a coffee. So you're on a one sort of caffeine hit, and then they say, and would you like something else? And you think, well, I wasn't going to, but this looks amazing now. So, you know, you pick up a cake or you pick up a croissant, and generally you then go from one sort of high of your blood sugar being raised by that very high in carbohydrate product that you're eating, to a drop or a dip in your blood sugar levels. And then of course we have to go for that again to be able to pick ourselves up. And one of the reasons for that is because when we haven't had enough sleep, when our stress cortisol hormone levels are raised, the problem with that is that our we find it more difficult to manage our blood sugar levels. So another hormone, the hormone insulin, which controls the level of sugar in your blood, actually is less sensitive. So it means that we are finding that we're having these dips and these rises in blood sugar more often. So the knock-on effect of that really that we see, and if you're thinking about sort of like a working day, or even a day at home, is that we're never going to manage our energy levels. We're going to feel great for a small period of time, followed by a drop, followed by having to go and chase that drop in energy. So whether that's another cup of coffee, whether it is like, scrabbling around in your desk drawer for that, sure, there was a chocolate bar or a packet of Haribo's or something that I can find to pick myself up. And that's exhausting. It's absolutely exhausting for our bodies, to try and constantly try and manage this peak and this drop in our blood sugar levels across the day. So concentration is affected, and actually the knock-on effect on that is possibly towards the end of the day, if you have had peaks and drops in your energy all day, you might then get home and actually, really be looking for that comfort food, maybe, choose things which are maybe not so appropriate, or maybe you sort of go out in the evening or have a takeaway or something, and then you've got that impact on your sleep again from your body trying to manage and metabolize all of that food. So this becomes like a roller coaster. It becomes like a vicious cycle. Yeah,
you can see why, putting energy to one side for a second, people that struggle with their weight, often it stems from poor sleep as well. And I never forget, one of the lessons that eventually I did learn from you, Claire, was that like most people, you try, or sometimes, not starve is probably a bit of an extreme word, but you do almost like try and eat less, because I might want to lose a few pounds. I started to recognize how I got to that, as you just said. I'd eat less, and then I'd be hungry, and then I'd chase. Mentally, you start chasing the calories, don't you? And then you put sleep into that as well. I'm thinking of days we might have a bit of a hangover over even. It's the same feeling, isn't it? You go, God, it's almost you can't stop. So keeping yourself well fueled and keeping yourself well, not tired. It was a revelation for me. I just wasn't making those poor decisions just because I was well rested and I was well fueled. Whereas when you try and fight it and beat it, you just can't. Your body will just chase it because your body knows what it needs. So yeah, but really, really, really fascinating. Great. Just for you on that point, like me, you're an advisor, but I know you're much more in the corporate finance world. But are you finding these kind of conversations are starting to become more common with leaders? Are leaders generally more aware of this stuff? Is it forming part of the conversation, even though you're having very sort of technical, transactional conversations?
I'd say it's mixed, in all honesty. I think some organizations, they're really adapting to a culture that is both accepting and encouraging of these types of conversations. Whereas if I'm being very brutally honest, the kind of world of corporate finance through to kind of investment banking, that in that culture, environment, it's far less so. It might be talked about, but actually, are the kind of actions being put in place? Are the behaviours of leaders, and are the expectations actually being adopted? Because I do think presenteeism in certain industries is still very heavy, long hours. But it's really interesting listening to Claire there just around that kind of the cycle, because it's what routine are you in? Because you can be in a good routine and then that becomes self-fulfilling, or you're in a negative routine and that becomes self-fulfilling. And at this time of year, it probably gets worse because, especially if you're in an environment where you spend time with clients, you're out 2 or 3 times a week in an evening. Which, guess what? You then have had something to drink. You've eaten some high sugar fatty food. You go to bed. You don't sleep well. You get up. You start to cycle again. So I do think it's something that needs to become more prevalent and kind of adopted, and probably even more so in some of the industries and companies that it's less accepted just now, because otherwise what you inevitably get, and this is common in professional services and advisory community, is you get burnout and people leave careers earlier than they would normally to go and do something different. It's not sustainable. So I think it's really mixed. We actually did a session with a team in Birmingham probably about 3 weeks ago, which was exactly this topic, which was it was an hour's discussion where we had an individual came in and was talking about health, well-being, nutrition, sleep patterns.
Yeah,
it's a little bit of a drop in the ocean kind of session, unless people then choose to do something with it, and you then follow on and do that more effectively. But yeah, mixed.
It's interesting. And I suppose, Claire, the big question I wanted to really ask you was, the evidence is so compelling, yet we've still got most business leaders still demanding presenteeism, and not embracing the reality of all the benefits this could bring. I mean, what is the message that we need to be understanding, so that if I'm that old school presenteeism leader, that I go, this is a no-brainer. What's the pitch? What's the pitch, Claire?
Yeah, it's difficult, isn't it? Because I guess if you looked at just if you're talking to an old school leader, if you're talking about productivity, the question is how do you measure it and what are you measuring? Because that's really difficult, isn't it? So how do you prove that it's actually making a difference? And one of those parts I would say is almost being able to show a difference in terms of, actually, if you collected data at the beginning, you made a few changes and then collected data. So you could look at for example, people's sleep patterns if they made a few changes, and actually what impact does that have on maybe how many hours they're sat at the computer, or how quickly they're getting work done, or perhaps how many sales they make, or whatever it might be. But I think the difficulty here, and Graham, you might be able to step in here, is how do you actually measure that change in terms of productivity? So we collect a lot of data when we start with working with individuals and with businesses, and we can show that there has been changes, but it's then being able to show that impact on those markers within business as well.
Oh, yeah, on the business. Graham, have you got a view on that?
Yeah, I think again there's a bit here around different industries, because if you work in an environment which is billable hours, technically you're measured on an outcome of a piece of work, but you're also measured on delivering billable hours. Now, how productive is every hour that's billed is a very big question, versus how efficiently can you deliver a good outcome from a piece of work. So I think different industries will find that kind of concept of productivity. And what I have seen, and what I would say is more of the bigger kind of corporate organizations, aside from that kind of corporate finance advisory piece that I've said, I actually think most of the bigger organizations are adapting and embracing the concepts of this. But then it comes down to how good are individual leaders of actually helping to embed that within their team. Because if an individual has grown up over the past 40 years working in a particular way as a leader, then changing the tone from the top is one thing, but actually changing the implementation leaders all the way through the organization, I think is the real challenge.
Yeah, and I agree with that, Graham. I think I am seeing in big organisations, I'm seeing it's on the agenda now. It's being talked about. It's being driven as an initiative. But yeah, you're right. The reality of what happens at ground level is somewhat different. And I think, Claire, you hit on a really good point about measurement. For me, I think my take on the measurement piece is, I think it does put a huge spotlight on how poorly businesses actually do measure productivity. And Graham's point, again, if it's billable hours in professional services, it doesn't mean it's productive hours. And I think there's probably it just, maybe that's the thing for the people listening to this is, how are you measuring your productivity? But I think there is a second angle, which is, do you care about how well your people's lives are outside of their work? Because it's almost like a moral responsibility to help them be as productive as possible, but still have, you said at the very start of this conversation, have enough in the tank for the rest of their life. And I think, though, that in itself has a business benefit, but it's a longer term one, which I think business leaders struggle with long term, is you're going to get that sustainably because they're not going to burn out, which is, I think, what Graham talked about, burnout. So yeah, great stuff. So out of time on this one, maybe just to finish this conversation, just for you, Claire, top 3 reasons why, as business leaders, we should really be embracing this notion of energy to boost productivity. What would be your top 3 reasons?
So number one, from health. So if you are at a point in your life where you have wealth now, then enjoy it. And to enjoy it, you're going to need to be healthy. So start being proactive and thinking about your health. Number 2 would be that actually we can optimize our time. So actually, by thinking about management of our energy, we can actually almost create more time in our day to be able to do the things that we want to be able to do. And ultimately to be able to perform better. Now, whether that's at work, home, within training, within any sports that you do. So they would be my top three facts. Tips.
Yeah, and I think that I like that. And I think, you know what, we have limited time today, but I think that last point around essentially what you're saying is actually improved quality. So we're talking about productivity here, but actually you're right, it's also an increase in quality of work, which I think is equally as important. And Graham, same question for you. What would be your top 3 reasons why we need to embrace this concept?
Yeah, so first would be kind of leadership shadow and the impact that you have and the energy that you've got both in the workplace on your people that you lead, but also at home, and the impact that has on your family, whether it's your partner, your children, or so on. I think the second is exactly similar to Claire's, which is health. Is we've only got one body, we've only got one mind. Actually looking after both the physical and mental health of ourselves is critical. And then the third and final bit is life is for living, and therefore you need to make sure that you've got the energy to do all the things that you want to do, and therefore energy is so critical in everything that can kind of input to that.
Yeah, great. I love that. And yeah, I mean, I agree with all those points. I think for me, just from this conversation today, I think what's really resonated again is that wealth and health. You've got to look after both. I love this notion of, as leaders, we need to give people permission to do this, and definitely, making time. Putting it in your diary, time boxing it as equally as you would meetings and other important things we need to do. I think they were my big 3 takeaways. So thank you again, Graham, Claire, for joining us today. For those listening, Claire and Graham are going to join us for our next episode, where we're going to continue this conversation and talk about energy hacks from all of this that will help to boost your productivity. But in the meantime, thank you for listening to Inside the Director Circle.